So if you're anything like me, you're seeing what's going on in the country and you feel like a lot's falling apart. I feel like I need to do something. And I've heard the same thing from a lot of friends, colleagues, and congregants. In a future post, I'm going to talk a little bit about a framework that's helping me to think about action. But this week, I want to talk about something pretty simple that I think we all need to do. So last week, I shared a prayer that I offered that was about loving our neighbor. And I got a lot of feedback from folks, people who are religious, not religious, saying, that really spoke to me. And I promised in this vlog that I would talk about where I get my inspiration, and a lot of it comes from the example of Jesus, of the Bible, and a story that I'm sure many of us have heard, like the story of the Good Samaritan, right? God, in the Bible, there's so much stuff about loving your neighbor and don't steal their cow, and there's just so much from the very beginning, the scriptures, all through the Hebrew Bible, all through the Torah. But God is like, here, let me just give you some very specific rules, like love your neighbor. Here's what it looks like. Not unclear, but let's be real. It's about the hardest thing to do. So there's this example in Luke 10. I usually read the Luke version of things, but it's also in Matthew. It's also in Mark. Anyway, but point being, there it says this expert in the law comes to Jesus and he says, "Teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" He's like, "Look, I heard that the big thing you're offering is this eternal life thing. I'm feeling that. What do I need to do?" And Jesus says, "What is written in the law? How do you read it?" So the guy turns back to him, this expert. He says, "Okay, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind." Like basically love God with everything you got. And then love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus says, "Great, you answered correctly. Do this and you will live." But the expert's like, I think he's thinking in the back of his mind, like, okay, but that's nothing new. Like, I could have told you that. Okay, so who is my neighbor? In reply, Jesus says this story. A man was going from Jerusalem to Jericho, from the like high holy place, the big town, smaller place, and he's on the road. When he's attacked by robbers, and they strip him of his clothes and they beat him and then they leave him half dead on the side of the road. And it says that a priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw him, he passed on the other side. So the religious guy, the guy that was supposed to accept the example, morality, passes to the other side. Then he says, a Levite who would have been a community leader. I think of him like maybe he was a city councilor, maybe he was like an activist, a community leader, but somebody big in the community. He sees him and he just passed on the other side too. And then finally, this guy who's a Samaritan. And it's important because like Jesus was a Jew, so most of the people he was talking to were Jewish, and Samaritans and Jews, like there was some conflict there. They were like cousins, but cousins who had a falling out, right? So this guy who, would had every right in the back of his mind to say, "Hey, if this was me on the side of the road, but this guy have helped me," he could have used that as an excuse. But this guy stops, and it says he picks him up, he bandages his wounds, he gives him some oil and wine to help him out, and then he puts him on his own donkey, walks beside him, takes him to the inn, and he took care of him. And the next day, clearly he had somewhere to go, so he takes the two denarii, some money, and he gives it to the innkeeper, and he says, "Look after him, and when I come back, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you have taking care of this guy." And then Jesus says to the expert, "Which of these three do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers?" And the expert in the law replies, "The one who had mercy on him." Jesus says, "Go and do likewise." All right, so this is like one of the most central teachings in Christianity. And it's so right. This is the gold standard. We are supposed to stand by and love and show up for people that we do not even know. We don't know what their circumstances, we don't know what happened, but we're just supposed to show love. Okay, great. Most important commandment, hardest thing to do. And really hard to do in this moment. So I want to suggest something that I think will make this all just a little bit easier. I want to suggest that it's harder to walk past someone because you're too busy. It's harder to get in your mind that, oh my gosh, I don't have the expertise to help. I'm just going to call the police or the pandemics. Like, they're the ones who should do it. It's harder to feel like our time and money are already stretched too thin. It's harder to wonder if the person on the side of the road deserve what they got if you know them. If you know them. And so I'm wanting to suggest that maybe, just maybe, part of the solution to us being able to do this, or we definitely need to stretch to the place where we're going to love the neighbor we don't know, but part of how we get there, the baby step we take before that, is we just get to know our neighbors. Because when we get to know them, when we really hear their story, I think we're going to have a harder time passing them by. So I really think this idea of getting to know our neighbors is important. When I was a kid, I knew my neighbors. I did. I knew them on both sides. I knew them across the way. But I've fallen out of the habit. I have gotten to the place where I do know some of my neighbors on both sides. I said, but like, I don't know all their names. I don't have all their phone numbers. I don't know their stories. I don't know where they grew up, some of them. And if I don't know people, if I haven't made those relationships, it's going to be so much easier for me to believe negative things about them or to pass them on this other side of the road. When we know someone, when we see all the things we have in common, when we recognize the challenges that they're facing, it's much easier to love them. It's harder to pass them by or to make assumptions about them. When we are told that they are the source of all our problems, it is so much harder to believe that lie when we know our neighbor. But there's also another reason I think we should know our neighbors, which is that I think there are tough times already happening for many of us, and there's more to come. Our government services are being stripped away. And so we're going to have to rely on each other. And when we love each other and know each other, it's easier to sacrifice for each other. And it is so much easier to work together to fill gaps and meet needs in our community. So I want to suggest that maybe you know all your neighbors everywhere, at home, at work, at school, on your commute. Maybe you are that kind of person, but I think a whole heck of a lot of us do not know our neighbors in the way we could or should. And I think that that is part of what is making our country much weaker. It is what is allowing us to believe lies about who our neighbors are, and to believe that we should put all our faith into somebody that we also don't know, but who's got a sketchy track record. But either way, I think it is worthwhile, no matter what, to take the time to know the people around us. So go out there and get to know your neighbors, where you live, where you work, where you go to school, where you pray, where you shop. Stop to talk to people. And not just a quick pleasantry. I want you to try to get to know them on a real level. I want you to at least spend 15 minutes. And when you walk away, make sure that you know their name and something about them. And I hope we'll keep building on this. So I want to give you 3 questions just because I think, just to help you get started. The first question is, what is your name? And tell me something about where it comes from. 2, what are you most thankful for? And 3rd, what have you done that you are most proud of? These are not the only questions, but they're ones that help people shine through, that help you to really get to know them, and they stay away from things that you need to fight about or argue about or try to change about them. Yes, we are divided and segregated, and yes, we will have to bridge to other racial groups and generations and income groups, and if that is easy for you to do, go ahead. But if you can't talk to the people right around you, even if they're just like you, how are you going to reach out to other folks? So lean in. And this is not just something I'm suggesting to you, but something I plan to do myself for the rest of this month. I am putting specific time on my calendar to go outside and knock on the doors of the 2 houses next to me and to sit out on my porch so I can just run into people and to begin to know my neighbors more. So I'm going to share my experience. I hope you will post your experience. Let's use the chat to share what kind of experiences you're having. But I think we need to make a commitment to know each other, to really know each other more, so that we can also do the work of loving each other. Yeah, is this a cheat? Absolutely. Let's make it a little bit easier to love each other.